Hey, badass black girls, and they making big moves. Hey, badass black girls, nothing that you can't do. They are the future, I'm trying to tell ya. They want the best, no time to settle. They got the strength to handle the pressure. These are the queens, nobody better. Yeah, changing the narrative, that is imperative. They about to rock this. Tell the women that you got this. Got no time for people who are toxic. It's all love, good vibes. You know I got your back, girl. Talking issues that matter. This is badass black girl, yeah.
Hello everyone, MJ here for another episode of Badass Black Girl. Our very special guest today is Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, and she's the author of A Girl is a Body of Water, an extraordinary novel. We're going to get to discuss it today. I'm really excited about that. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, MJ. Thank you for having me. And my name is Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, and I'm a badass black girl.
I read your novel and I was just I was inspired and I loved every minute of it. I wanted to ask you, what makes a badass black girl? What do you think that is?
I think that is a bold, loud, independent girl who does not care what the world thinks.
And that leads us to your novel then. Tell us a little bit about um, A Girl is a Body of Water. What led you to writing this book? Tell us a little bit about the journey toward the completion of this book.
Okay. A Girl is a Body of Water is about Chirabo, a 12-year-old girl who lives with her grandparents in rural Uganda and is beloved, and she's living a good life, but she has two problems. When she doesn't know who her mother is, and sometimes when she is unhappy, she flies out of her body, which makes her think that she could be a witch, and which then makes her think that perhaps she doesn't know who her mother is because she's a witch. So she goes looking for a witch to ask and help her find her mother, also help her get rid of the flying. But when she gets to the witch herself has her own agenda for Chirabo, and that's where the story starts. She promises she's going to look for her mother, and she's also going to help her, get rid of the flying. But she also tries to keep her coming visiting to her longer than she should be. So that's the novel. What made me write it is it's just because I'm a woman, and I was exploring why the life of my mother and my grandmothers and my aunts and all the women around me, why our lives are the way they are. And I connected that to our bodies, the way our bodies are, but I also connected it to my culture and to my country, the way we are. And that book comes out of those three elements. It has taken me a while to write it. I started writing it way back in 2001 when I was doing my MA. Actually, I had started writing a lot earlier in 98, but I wrote for 2 weeks and threw it away thinking it wasn't really good. But then in 2001, went back to it, really worked hard on it and finished it in 2003. Unfortunately, it was rejected everywhere. I tried again in 2005 after rewriting it, rejected. Rewrote it again, 2008, tried it again. They wouldn't have it. So I put it away and wrote my second novel, which was published as my first novel, which is called Kintu. So that's the journey.
I've been wondering the entire time I was reading and learning about this character was 13, but she's so relatable, even to me. And I'm almost 40, and I started imagining you writing this book, and I wanted to know about your writing process,
Mhm.
um, and not just about your writing process, but I wanted to be able to be in your skin and be a writer from Uganda. I'm just wondering about the experience of growing in your birth country as a writer, and just what does it look like to be a writer, um, for you? What do your days look like? Your process? Tell us all about it.
Okay, so writing for me is a very, very long process. So normally a book might take something like 3 or 4 years knocking about in my head before I put pen on paper. And with this one, I started with pencil and paper because at the time I didn't even have a computer. And I now understand why I started it in 98 and I, it didn't work and then came back to it in 2001. I think by then the story had developed in my mind because I spent some time with the character, with their world, getting to know their problem, getting to know the story, knocking around in my head before I put it down on paper. So, and then I start writing. At that point, I write very fast and I write compulsively because by then I have quite a bit of material in my mind. And when I run out of what to write, I normally don't go back and edit because often half of it is auto drivel. And I know I'm going to throw it away. But if I look at it immediately, I lose heart and just throw it away. So, and then I wait until I've got more material and then write again. But normally that is just the bare bones. Now, when I finish the story, that is a skeletal story, then I go back and put flesh on the bonds. That's when I put in detail and focus on the characters and look at the place and look at beginning, middle, ending, and how then am I going to structure the story. And then I look at the themes that have arisen, organically out of writing. Which ones do I want to highlight? Which one do I want to get rid of? And which ones do I want to infuse in the story? So that takes quite a long time, that putting flesh. And it's like just going back and cutting, getting the shape of the story right. And then I start to edit. Now, that takes a long time. Perhaps I should point out that while I'm writing, I do research because I don't research my novels before I start. Sometimes research takes me into all sorts of directions.
Mm-hmm.
So I write my story, and then when I come to a part that I don't know very well, that needs research, I research only that and then write it and then move on. And another part needs researching and research that bit and then move on. And so that means I do a lot of research throughout the writing. But perhaps the part that takes longest is the editing process. I edit quite a lot because, again, I write a lot and I write impulsively. And I also try to be part of a writing group. People, I tend to hang around with people who are better writers than I am, who are going to say, oh, that's not working. Oh, Jennifer, that's not working. And I'm going to listen to that. So I do share out with other writers my writing. Sometimes I also hang around with friends who are willing to listen to my story because I like talking about it and listening to it, and also looking at their reaction to my story. And I know that's working, that's not working. And then, listening to what they think about it. So but then when all that is done, then I sit down to editing, proper editing. That is the most painful part of it, you know. It's uninteresting, and often by the time I send the book off to my publisher, I don't want to look at it again.
I can definitely relate. And it's so important that you talk about this because a lot of aspiring writers, when they think about writing, they see the part where they're sitting down and just letting it all flow. And it's a fun part. But after that part, there is editing, and it's not always an enjoyable process.
Now, and you know what? My own editing is not as painful as when I edit with the editor, especially the first editor. That is the one that is going to come back and say to you, this chapter is not working. I'm afraid we're going to have to get rid of it. And you've nurtured, you've nursed those. And sometimes you feel this is it. This feels real. So, for example, in my first novel that was published, um, pieces that I had written out of real life, all of them got edited out. And I kept on telling my editor, look, Ella, that really happened. And she said, I'm sorry, Jennifer, maybe you don't know how to write what really happened. Just fiction. It can be painful and unglamorous.
So worth it though. We have to learn to kill our babies, like they said.
Oh, yeah. By the end of it, you can see the beauty that comes out of the pain.
Let's go back to Kirabo for a moment.
Yes,
I grew up in Haiti, and so
yes.
many parts of this story reminded me of my own country, particularly this idea of oral storytelling, because the very reason why the question of the witch comes up is because people believe in witches. And
Yeah.
um, there are so many beautiful legends and um, elements of our lores that
Oh,
make
yeah.
our writing richer. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, to ask you about the oral traditions of your country and how they've influenced your writing.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I was very lucky as a child. I had access to my grandparents, and we used to do a lot of storytelling, and we took pride in telling stories. Even if you've heard the story 4 or 5 times, it's how you tell it, you know. So I had that original access to stories when I was a child. But when I started my first degree, I was doing African literature. And the first module we did was in oral African traditions. And that's when I discovered that oral tales are not actually what I thought they were as a child. As a child, they're harmless. They're just stories about pretty awful girls or horrible stepdaughters. So, but then as a student, then I started to see that oral traditions are actually coded, that they are there for you to decode and get to the meaning. And that made them very exciting, and we did a lot of research in them. And it's not something that I planned, but when I started writing, I found myself drawing a lot from those oral traditional or African traditions. And I I mean I was such a reader when I was a child, and I've read quite a lot, and I was reading mostly Western novels and Western books. And as I studied literature all the way through school. I did all my degrees in literature. So I did a lot of Western literature. But at one point, I started to realize that my literary roots were not in these Western novels. They were not in Dante. They were not in Shakespeare or Dickens or Jane Eyre, rather the Austen or the other um, novels that I was introduced to in school, the Western canon. And I quickly then realized that my literary roots are actually in those oral traditions, which have been passed down through generations, which have been worked on by different generations until they came down to me. And that is the creativity my ancestors left behind. And I was so keen to connect my writing back to my ancestors' writing. And in this novel, I try to retrieve all that writing that is about women, that women have done in oral texts, and try to decode them with the reader and say, look what they left behind. But it's not just about showing what we have in Uganda, but it is to a reader like you, who is from Haiti, to go back and look in your grandmother's stories, or the stories that they've left behind, and you will be surprised what those women have recorded in those stories.
I love your answer so much. Also because you mentioned talking to family members and kind of getting their take on different stories, and it reminded me of the fact that the main character of your novel, she's being raised basically by a village. So
Oh,
it's there's this idea of having so many sources, not just for storytelling, of course, and wisdom, but people who are actually taking care of you. And again, it got me thinking about my own experience and how extended family members and even close neighbors and friends, they become part of your family and you start calling them uncle and auntie. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your family and how um, just the role they've played in helping you become who you are today, a successful writer who's writing um, striking fiction, stories that will stay with the reader forever. So I'm always a little bit curious about what did it take for someone to get to that point to be able to be successful as a writer and really use their word to make a difference. Tell me a little bit about your family.
well, like all Africans, I come from a very, very, very wide family. Now, and by African standards, perhaps mine is smaller, but we have, first of all, we have the family, and then we have, and the family is you, parents, grandparents, from mom and from dad and aunties, and that is the immediate family
Right.
for us. The extended family are all those people who are related. So my grandfather's brother's children, those are extended family. Everybody else is very close. But like Chirabo, often there were family members whom I didn't know how we related to them. Okay. Someone arrives at home and your mom says, that's your grandmother. Kneel down and say hello. You don't ask what kind of grandmother or how are we related. So I was brought up by a lot of people, most of whom I didn't know how I was related to. And sometimes I would go to my grandfather's village, both my dad's and my mom's, and the whole village were relatives. I don't know how we were related to them, but you would pass a house and someone would say, is that Jennifer? Oh, come on, come on. Are you going to pass without greeting me? And then you go, and then she feeds you. And you think, should I walk further down because I'm really full? Anybody, and often we try to avoid all those relatives. It's until you leave these behind and then they've gone away that you realize, oh my God, that was wonderful. I'm so lucky I had all of those. And I wasn't brought up by my mom or my dad. I was brought up by a lot of people. I once stayed with one aunt and then I stayed with another. I've lived with this great grand in English, or that great grand. And then finally, I was brought up by one specific aunt, and I grew up calling her mother and calling her husband father. You know, for me, a lot of people, I can't tell you how many people have got their input in me, or have molded this person that is writing. But at the same time, the writing itself has not only been molded by the storytelling that I did as a child, but also watching grown-ups telling stories. So I had an uncle. When he started telling stories, you just sat down and listened, because he was hilarious. But the way he arranged his events, and this is conversation. I'm not talking about storytelling. I'm
Right.
talking about arriving and say, you cannot believe what has just happened to me. And by the time he's done, you know, it's almost a whole chapter. So that I mean, I am not capable of telling you how many, but it's a lot of people, and it's a lot of storytelling. And perhaps my mother too. My mother is also a very humorous storyteller. When she tells stories, for her, it could be about dying, it could be about something terrible, but you're just in stitches laughing. So I think all of that has gone into making me.
And that's awesome. And you recently participated to the Miami Book Fair. So
Yes, it was.
yeah, so
Oh,
this
God,
year
that
the
was
Miami Book
fantastic.
Fair is online. For those of you who don't know, the new website is Miami Book Fair Online because it's totally online this year. New panels and discussions were released from the 15th to the 22nd, but access to those panels is going to continue until the end of the year. So I included a link to Jennifer's panel under this video so that you can see her interacting with other writers at the book fair. And I encourage everyone to go and register and make sure you follow the Miami Book Fair. They're one of the organizations that make this podcast possible. And also Books and Books. I want to remind everyone to support your independent bookstores. Books and Books is the official Miami Book Fair bookstore, and Jennifer's book is available at Books and Books. I also included a link to the book um, that leads directly to the book so you can purchase it and support the writer. We really need to support our writers. I mean, I can't imagine Jennifer putting a book out during a pandemic. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Oh my days. A book out during this pandemic. It was, it all started out very well. My two publishers, Tin House in the US and One World in Britain, agreed that, on the date. So we edited, everything was ready, and then closed down. And in, I was unfortunate that my first book was coming out in Europe, in France, in Holland, the Netherlands, and in Italy. So all that was, was not made possible because I couldn't travel, and in the beginning, most of the events were just closed. People hadn't come up with this idea of holding everything online. But and so when we had a lockdown, my publishers got together and were wondering, what do we do? The British were of the mind that perhaps we should wait until 2021, perhaps in spring. But the American Tin House had already started promoting the book, and they had put out the galleys, and they had done so much that they felt, no, we would rather, go ahead, perhaps put it forward. And so they decided to go for September. And at that point, we were worried. We didn't know what would happen. But then, September came, and before September, I started to do uh, events online from with American audiences, and it started to get exciting. And because I was not traveling, getting on the plane and then spending so many days recovering in a hotel, you just here, you just go change your clothes, do something about your face and whatever, make sure that you're clean up here, and then sit before a computer and talk about it. We realized that we could do a lot more online than I would have done if was traveling. So we started to get excited about this way of doing things,
Right.
and I've done way, way more events than I would have done had we not been on lockdown. Now, lockdown is terrible, terrible, terrible. A lot of people suffering, and there's a lot of sickness. But for some reason, the publishing world has been able to adapt quite quickly, and readers have been very supportive because they are at home, and they are looking for ways of, entertaining themselves within the four walls of their houses. So it's been really interesting finding other ways of promoting a book that is coming out during the pandemic.
If I may ask, in what city are you, and um how i- how is it to live through a pandemic in your particular city?
Okay, I'm in Manchester, Britain, right now, and we went into lockdown long before, perhaps 2 weeks before the US. So mid-March, we were in lockdown, and unfortunately for me, I got unwell quite quickly. So for 2 weeks, I was pretty unwell, with high fevers, but I didn't go to hospital. However, when I recovered, for some reason, I could not read, I could not write from April, May until the end of June. And I would just stare into space and watch Netflix, and but I was mostly indoors. We were allowed to go and do shopping in, getting the bare necessities, but I was mostly indoors. And Manchester is one of those cold and wet cities of Europe. And for some reason, we've had a warm summer. It's just like nature, just to give you a warm summer when you can't really enjoy it properly. you know, but we are in lockdown again. So again, I'm indoors, but now I'm reading and I'm writing, and so I don't mind it very much.
I'm so glad to hear that you're being productive during the
Yeah,
lockdown,
yeah,
and
being
we
productive.
can
Yeah.
ju- we all we can do is hope that everything goes back to normal sooner rather than later. But
Yeah.
with although things have been a little difficult with the pandemic and the lockdown, it's so fantastic that your book did come out because it's such a ray of sunshine. It's inspiring. It's a great read. Again, I want to encourage anybody watching us to get the book and support the author, because she's definitely badass. And thank you, Jennifer, for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, MJ, for hosting me. I've enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for the wonderful words about my book.
Let's stay in touch. Let us know
Absolutely.
about new projects you may be working on,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
we'll see each other
So,
again soon.
this is a fantastic platform you've made available to authors like me, and I appreciate very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.